Kevin overheard Jeffrey Bowie accusing Wayne Ford of wanting the Power Pills formula for himself, so he decided to offer the pill formula to only one of the leaders but left it up to them to choose who it would be. When Wayne Ford refused to agree to this stipulation, Kevin called Paul Vaughn to come forward. Afraid of being left out of the deal, Wayne tried to convince both Paul and Jeffrey not to let Kevin fool them with his poisonous scheme. However, neither of them believed him, and Jeffrey trusted that Paul would share the pill formula with him. As Paul walked closer towards Kevin, Wayne roared angrily in defiance as he shook with anger. Wayne wanted Jeffrey to support him. Paul Vaughn looked straight at Jeffrey Bowie and reassured him. "Jeffrey, just stand there and don't move. When I get the Power Pills formula, I'll definitely share it with you. After all, we've been through so much together over the years, you don't doubt our relationship, do you?" "Of course, Paul. You don't need to worry about me. I believe you." Jeffrey Bowie wasn't as simple-minded as he appeared to be. He clearly trusted Paul Vaughn's words over Wayne Ford's. Seeing Paul Vaughn approaching Kevin step by step, it was as if Wayne Ford had been stabbed in the heart by thousands of sharp blades. "No!" Wayne Ford roared angrily. Suddenly, his body started to shake violently as if he'd reached a state of madness. "I already warned you. Now you've left me with no choice." This was the final straw for Wayne Ford, and he couldn't control his rage any longer. Then he drew all of the spiritual energy in his body and seemed to vanish in the blink of an eye. Suddenly, Paul Vaughn felt a gust of wind coming from behind. He didn't even have time to turn around before he was struck in the face. Blood gushed out of his mouth as he was forced to stagger back a few feet. Did Wayne Ford actually hit him with his palm? This was something that no one had expected. Even Kevin, the person who had tried to pit them against each other, was caught off guard by Wayne's actions. While he knew that the three leaders would get into a heated argument because of the condition he'd set, he never thought that the usually mild-mannered and composed Wayne Ford would actually have such a violent temper and start fighting with his colleagues. "I told you not to go over there. Why didn't you listen to me?" Wayne Ford asked as he looked at his right palm. In the heat of the moment, he was agitated and annoyed, but now he seemed to immediately regret what he'd done, and he couldn't bear the sudden pang of guilt that he was feeling. Paul Vaughn leaned on a large tree as he slowly stood up from the ground. His face was extremely pale. "Wayne, how dare you hurt me?" Paul Vaughn coughed violently a few times as he spat out some blood. I don't know. Something came over me. I didn't do it on purpose." Wayne Ford's right palm was trembling. He couldn't believe what he'd just done. "You didn't do it on purpose? Bullshit. Just admit it. You were afraid that I'd forget about you after sharing the Power Pills formula with Jeffrey. In the future, when both the Central Alternative Healing Academy and the Southeast School for Natural Medicine ascend with the help of the Power Pill, you're afraid that it would threaten your position as leader of the top 10 schools. That's why you hit me, isn't it?" After Paul Vaughn finished speaking, he gasped for breath as he struggled to recover his strength. "Wayne, I didn't expect you to have so many devious tricks up your sleeve," Jeffrey Bowie said with anger burning in his heart. "Why can't the Southeast School for Natural Medicine and Central Alternative Healing Academy rise to power? With the pinnacle about to attack us, is it wrong for us to want to increase the strength of our members?" "No, you've got the wrong idea about me. I really didn't do it on purpose." Wayne Ford's face was filled with shame as he adamantly shook his head. However, in the current atmosphere, the more he explained his actions, the more it seemed he was simply trying to cover it up. It was a really difficult position for Wayne to be in. Seeing the three old men arguing, Kevin looked at them with a bewildered look on his face. He'd never thought that things would escalate to such an extent. With just a few words, the internal strife between them was on the edge of getting out of control. Paul Vaughn held back the urge to cough out a mouthful of blood as he growled.
Wayne, listen up. I don't care if you did it on purpose or not. In any case, after getting the pill formula tonight, the two of us will sever all ties with each other. This means that the Central Alternatives Healing Academy will no longer have any relationship with the Healing Arts School. After being severely injured by Wayne Ford's sneak attack and losing the ability to fight, Paul was angry at how he was taken out of contention for obtaining the pill formula from Kevin. Moreover, he also felt ashamed for letting down his school.
Paul, we don't have to resort to that. I'll prove myself to you.
Wayne Ford, who had nothing more to say, suddenly slapped his own chest hard with all his might. Just as had happened to Paul Vaughn, this made him spit out a mouthful of blood, and as the spiritual energy in his body quickly weakened, it was obvious that he too had lost his ability to fight.
Now that I've taken myself out of contention for obtaining the pill formula, you should all believe me now, shouldn't you?
Wayne Ford asked helplessly. With every word he spoke, more blood would drip out of the gaps between his teeth. Just as Paul Vaughn and Jeffrey Bowie's expressions began to change, Kevin suddenly remarked loudly, "Wayne Ford, you've really put on a good show tonight. But to inflict such serious damage onto yourself, aren't you taking things a little too far just to convince them of your innocence? But I commend your commitment to playing the innocent victim." Paul Vaughn and Jeffrey Bowie were upset when they heard this. They didn't completely believe Kevin's words, but at the same time, they couldn't also completely rule out the possibility of what he had said.
What are you talking about?
Wayne Ford's expression changed. Forget it. I won't argue with you any further. Besides, I'm not the target of your trick anyway. Kevin continued to endure the discomfort in his head as he looked at him indifferently. Then he waved his hand at Jeffrey Bowie and continued. Mr. Bowie, now that things have already gotten to this point, it seems that you're the most suitable person to share the Power Pills formula with. After all, you are the last one standing. Come over here quickly, and I'll whisper the contents of the pill formula in your ear. All three of them were stunned to hear this. Paul Vaughn was the first to recover from his shock and instantly got a ferocious look on his face at the sudden turn of events. He didn't expect that after all their arguing with Wayne Ford, it would be Jeffrey Bowie who ended up benefiting from it. As soon as Jeffrey Bowie regained his senses, his face immediately looked joyful.
I guess you still have some insight, kid. You aren't as stupid as I thought.
When he passed by Paul Vaughn, he didn't forget to pat him on the shoulder a few times.
Don't worry, Paul. When I get the Power Pills formula, I won't forget to share it with you. After all, we've always had each other's backs throughout the years. I believe you, Jeffrey. Don't worry about me. Since I can't walk over to Kevin myself, the only other person I trust here right now is you. In the future, I'll also help you defend your school if someone decides to launch a sneak attack against you.
Paul Vaughn had no other choice but to place his hopes on Jeffrey Bowie.
If I'd known that Kevin would hand over the pill formula earlier, I wouldn't have let any of this happen tonight. Look at the two of you. You're both seriously injured for no good reason.
Jeffrey Bowie chided him in a carefree manner. Right now, he was in an exceptionally good mood, as if he'd already seen the day when the Southeast School for Natural Medicine would become the best among the top 10 schools, effectively placing the great powers under his leadership. What Mr. Bowie said is right, Kevin remarked timidly. Mr. Bowie, please listen carefully to me. The pill formula is of great importance, so you can't let anyone eavesdrop. Looking at the two people whispering to each other, Paul Vaughn felt very uncomfortable. If it wasn't for Wayne Ford's sneak attack, he would have been the one who had gotten the pill formula firsthand from Kevin. But now all he could do was watch and wait, with the future of the Central Alternative Healing Academy hanging in the balance and depending upon his relationship with Jeffrey Bowie. As he thought about this, Paul Vaughn's fury began to grow as he gave Wayne Ford a fierce look. If it wasn't for the fact that he was seriously injured, Paul Vaughn would have rushed forward and beaten him to death. Have you already memorized the pill formula, Mr. Bowie? Refining pills according to the method that I've told you should be very simple. Kevin's voice suddenly grew stronger.
Can you speak louder, kid? I didn't hear anything of what you said just now.
Jeffrey Bowie cupped his hand over his ear and said,
Say it again.
Mr. Bowie, you... Kevin was suddenly stunned, and then he pretended to express a look of realization. I understand what you're trying to do, Mr. Bowie. Your plan was really brilliant. Now you're blaming me for not saying the pill formula clearly. Hearing their conversation, Paul Vaughn suddenly got a bad feeling.
What are you talking about? I just asked you to tell me the formula again. I really didn't hear it clearly,
Jeffrey Bowie said very impatiently.
Mr. Bowie, don't worry. I know what you're doing and I'll go along with your little game.
After saying that, Kevin brushed the dust off his shoulders. Then he decisively pushed off the ground and jumped high up into the air.
Hey kid, we're not done here yet. Where do you think you're going?
Jeffrey Bowie quickly stretched out his hand and tried to grab Kevin. However, he wasn't even able to touch the edge of Kevin's torn jacket. Just as Jeffrey Bowie was about to try grabbing him again, the three leaders heard the sound of some footsteps in the forest. A second later, 5 people appeared in front of Kevin as he landed back on the ground. Upon seeing them, Jeffrey Bowie's pupils grew wide while Paul Vaughn and Wayne Ford both got an astonished look at the same time. Although they didn't know where these 5 men came from, they could tell that they were all giving off a powerful aura. And the weakest one was a level 5 expert who had almost the same power base as Jeffrey Bowie. None of them had expected Kevin to have such powerful warriors by his side. These 5 men were none other than Kevin's latest recruits, the Tanner brothers. Mr. Bowie, please use the pill formula carefully. Don't be deceived by other people with ulterior motives, Kevin advised him with a mischievous smile. I wish you a lot of success in improving your power base, and the strength of the Southeast School for Natural Medicine will surely increase dramatically to become the best among the top 10 schools. Anyway, I don't want to keep bothering the 3 of you anymore, so enjoy the rest of your night. With the help of Elijah Tanner and his brothers, Kevin quickly rushed out of the forest. Within a few seconds, they disappeared without a trace. With both Paul Vaughn and Wayne Ford too injured to fight over the right to obtain the Power Pills formula, Jeffrey Bowie excitedly approached Kevin, who then whispered some words to him. However, when Jeffrey didn't hear a word of what he said, Kevin made it seem that he was just pretending to not have heard anything in front of Paul and Wayne. Just as Jeffrey was about to confront him, the Tanner brothers suddenly arrived at the scene. Sensing that all 5 men were powerful warriors, the 3 leaders were surprised. With that, Kevin mischievously wished Jeffrey luck with the pill formula before quickly rushing out of the forest.
Don't chase after them, Jeffrey.
Paul Vaughn hurriedly stopped Jeffrey Bowie, who was about to chase after Kevin and the Tanner brothers.
Just as I had gotten my hands on that elusive pill formula, it suddenly slipped through my fingers.
Jeffrey Bowie murmured to himself as he furiously punched a tree. His punch snapped the tree trunk and it immediately toppled to the ground, stirring up an enormous cloud of dust. After hesitating for a moment, Paul Vaughn couldn't help but ask,
Jeffrey, now that Kevin has told you the Power Pills formula, do you mind sharing it with me?
Jeffrey, our 3 schools have always had a strong relationship. You can't be biased toward me and just leave me hanging,
Wayne Ford immediately asked. Jeffrey didn't know what to say in the face of their questions.
What's wrong, Jeffrey? What are you waiting for? Hurry up and tell us.
Paul Vaughn was getting impatient and riled up.
The 3 of us worked together to get the pill formula from Kevin tonight. Now that it's already in your hands, don't tell me that you plan to selfishly keep it all to yourself.
Right now, Wayne Ford didn't care about his own injuries anymore. He just wanted to get the pill formula and call it a night.
It's not that. The problem is I still don't know what it is either. Kevin's voice was too soft just now, so I didn't hear what he said clearly. I only heard the words Power Pills Formula and nothing else. Jeffrey Bowie's face turned red. Are you kidding me? Wayne Ford got a discouraged look on his face. Jeffrey Bowie just lowered his head in silence. Despite being more than 6 feet tall, he looked like a little kid who'd made an embarrassing mistake. Jeffrey, why don't you want to share it with us? The Power Pills formula is extraordinary. It's not something that you should be benefiting from alone, especially with the pinnacle coming soon to threaten us all. Wayne Ford was so angry that he started to clench his teeth. Thinking back to what Kevin had said earlier, he and Paul Vaughn were certain that Kevin had actually told Jeffrey Bowie the pill formula.
Jeffrey, think about the consequences carefully. After all, this is a matter of great importance, so you can't afford to be so reckless.
Paul Vaughn was so anxious that he coughed up another mouthful of blood.
I really didn't hear him clearly.
Jeffrey Bowie wanted to cry so hard, but he couldn't even shed a single tear at the moment. Although it was already late at night, the Archer family's mansion was still brightly lit as Dominic sat on the sofa with a dejected expression on his face. More than 10 of his trusted aides were standing in the room with him, and all of them had mean looks on their faces.
Boss, Drake Cook attacked some of our properties the night after he came out of the hospital. As of half an hour ago, 5 or 6 places were destroyed.
One of his trusted aides reported quickly. As soon as he finished speaking, the rest of his aides immediately became indignant.
Damn that Drake Cook. We can't let him get away with this. Even though he's just been released from the hospital, we must send him back there as soon as possible.
One of them sneered.
I can't believe he has the nerve to attack us when he hasn't even fully recovered yet. Perhaps he's deliberately looking for trouble this time around.
Another one shook his head in disbelief.
Boss, I'll personally drag Drake Cook back here immediately. We must get back at him.
A third one volunteered. At this point, Dominic's aides started discussing the problem with each other, making the whole room become quite noisy. A few of them even rolled up their sleeves as if they were ready for a fight at any time. After they had calmed down, Dominic slowly raised his head and looked at them all.
Can't you see that Drake Cook is just doing this on behalf of someone else? Why else would he dare to make such a big move given his current condition?
There was no anger in Dominic's voice. Instead, it sounded unusually calm. Given his ruthless reputation, it didn't make sense at all.
Boss, do you mean someone ordered Drake Cook to do this?
One of his aides quickly reacted and exclaimed loudly. Everyone was stunned at first, then they slowly came back to their senses as well.
What the hell? Is there somebody that powerful in Chicago?
Another aide wondered.
What the boss just said makes sense, but who would Drake Cook listen to?
A third one tried to think of someone.
Could it be Mitchell Cook? It can't be. He's never bothered to take an interest in our line of business over the years.
For a moment, this was all everyone was talking about as they tried to make sense of things. However, without having enough information, everything was mostly left to speculation, as none of them understood the true implications of the situation. Meanwhile, Dominic Archer continued to just sit on the sofa and didn't say another word. He didn't feel a need to explain this further with his aides. The truth was that there really was such a person in Chicago. Not only could he command Drake Cook, but even Mitchell Cook, Adriana Wright, and many other influential figures would listen to his orders. Still, Dominic Archer's aides couldn't connect the dots between this person and the one he had instructed to act on his behalf. Dominic let out a long breath and asked,
"What's the latest update on the dinner meeting that I've asked you to arrange? Did the CEO of the Williams Company already confirm his attendance?"
"No, not exactly, but Miss Wilson from the Williams Company said that she'll call me tomorrow morning," Nathan Porter answered in a low voice. Nathan Porter had been following Dominic Archer for almost 5 years, and he was different from Dominic's other trusted aides. While they were mostly fixated on fiercely attacking their opponents, he played the role of a steady right-hand man who provided wise counsel to Dominic Archer and had been assigned many special tasks, especially during the past 2 years as his empire grew.
This matter is very important. You should pay more attention to it,
Dominic Archer remarked solemnly. Hearing this, the other aides were puzzled. They couldn't figure out why Dominic Archer was so concerned about the president of the Williams Company. Could it be that he had plans to enter the entertainment industry? Back in Corwin Tower, Kevin sat down heavily on the sofa. The throbbing pain inside his head caused by Wayne Ford's mirage had yet to disappear. At the same time, the 5 Tanner brothers were standing by his side guarding him.
Mr. Williams, did you suffer some sort of mental attack?
Elijah Tanner asked with some concern. His keen eyes had already seen through Kevin's difficulties. Yes, Wayne Ford did this to me. I heard that it was the Healing Arts School's secret technique, the mirage. It was very painful for Kevin to speak. Every time he said something, his brain would immediately start hurting.
Mr. Williams, have you ever paid attention to training your mental strength before?
Elijah asked with curiosity. Kevin's face turned slightly red after being asked this question. He'd never really paid attention to this aspect in his training beyond some of the meditative techniques that Catherine Swinton had taught him. Elijah braced himself and asked,
Mr. Williams, I'd like to ask you another question. Have you ever explored the depths of the great powers?
Kevin slowly shook his head. He'd always heard about the great powers as a general term encompassing all of the schools and organizations associated with increasing one's power base through herbalism and strength training. However, Kevin never really had much exposure beyond what was going on at the Healing Arts School and the top 10 schools, as well as the underground organizations that they were opponents with.
Although I don't know how you got on bad terms with the top 10 schools, judging from what happened earlier, they didn't take you seriously at all and heavily underestimated your strength. As such, it seems that they weren't expecting to use drastic measures and unleash the full extent of their power against you.
Elijah explained carefully. Where are you going with all of this? Kevin narrowed his eyes, not understanding what he meant.
Mr. Williams, when we were still working for the Morris family, we carefully studied your past.
A pensive look appeared in Elijah's eyes as he recalled this.
You only started dabbling in herbalism and enhancing your power base very recently, and you've only come into contact with the top 10 schools as a student of the Healing Arts School for just 1 semester. As a result, even though you're already immensely powerful, you've barely scratched the surface of your talent as a fairly new expert. In fact, there's a lot that you don't know about the true situation regarding how the rest of the great powers operate.
Elijah continued.
The top 10 schools have been very limited about their ways of thinking over the years, so it'll be hard for you to fully nurture your gifts if you don't expand your horizons beyond their teachings. There are a lot more things that you can learn and discover outside of that bubble.
After listening to his words, Kevin suddenly forgot about the pain inside his head and began to think about what Elijah had said about the top 10 schools and the great powers. The top 10 schools had existed for a very long time. Moreover, didn't the Healing Arts School always train its students for them? If trained experts didn't eventually end up being a member of the top 10 schools, how else could they be of use within the great powers?
Given the looming threat of the pinnacle, I really urge you to dive deep into the endless possibilities once you explore what the rest of the great powers have to offer. Only then can you unlock your true potential and lead the charge against the forces of the pinnacle.
Elijah took a deep breath and looked at Kevin to see his reaction. I don't doubt anything of what you just said, Elijah, but I'm very curious about one thing. How do you know all of these things? Kevin raised his eyebrows slightly. All this time, Kevin had thought that Elijah Tanner and his brothers were merely subordinates of the Morris family. If that was the case, then how could he be privy to so many secrets about the top 10 schools and the great powers?
Mr. Williams, to tell you the truth, although we used to work for the Morris family, we were previously trained as experts by another organization.
Elijah's facial expression didn't change, but his eyes suddenly sparkled as he revealed this secret to him. After returning to Corwin Tower, Kevin's head was still throbbing in pain from Wayne Ford's mirage attack. Seeing this, Elijah Tanner told him that he knew how Kevin was still a fairly new expert. Given the top 10 school's narrow ways of thinking, he then urged Kevin to expand his horizons and explore what the rest of the great powers had to offer. By doing so, he would be able to unlock his true potential and lead the charge against the Pinnacle. When Kevin asked how he knew so much, Elijah revealed that the Tanner brothers had previously been trained by another organization before working for the Morris family. This answer shook Kevin to the core. From what Jake Morris had told him, the Pinnacle was so powerful that it posed a deadly threat to all of mankind. Moreover, although Jake Morris was just a representative of the Morris family, he'd been surrounded by more than 20 powerful assistants, among whom were level 5 experts like Elijah Tanner and his brothers. That made Kevin wonder how many experts were actually employed by the Morris family as a whole. Looking at Kevin, who was deep in thought, Elijah decided to share a little more insight.
Beyond the top 10 schools, there are countless other organizations within the great powers. In fact, the strength of the most powerful experts trained by these other groups is in a different league compared to anyone you've encountered from the top 10 schools so far. The real reason why the top 10 schools are considered as the most prominent among the great powers is that they chose to pursue fame and status over excellence.
Elijah paused for a moment before continuing.
Given the federal government's laws that aim to protect ordinary citizens from the affairs of the great powers, they strictly monitor and limit any organization whose collective strength exceeds the expectations of the capital. Since this can severely inhibit schools from training experts to become as powerful as possible, many of them have opted to stay away from the public eye in order to hide their true strength.
Elijah added,
So, Mr. Williams, if you're wondering why those leaders from the top 10 schools were so willing to negotiate with you earlier, it's because they recognize that you're a special talent. And should you decide to align yourselves with any of them in the future, it'll automatically raise their school's reputation exponentially. But at the end of the day, none of them have your best interests in mind when it comes to helping you reach your true potential.
Kevin gently nodded his head as he tried to process all this information. Didn't you just say that you were trained by a different organization? What is it called?
Its name is the Hidden Summit Training Institute, a school whose standards are far above those of the top 10 schools. Its location is a secret to outsiders, and no one knows exactly who founded the school or how long it has existed. While it is a part of the great powers, the school tends to operate independently and steers clear of internal politics and affairs.
Elijah revealed to him candidly.
In our case, we really just stumbled upon it almost by chance when we were approached by a mysterious figure, who then recruited us to join. But even though we trained in the Hidden Summit Training Institute for 10 years, a lot of things about it remain a mystery, even to us.
Elijah Tanner had a thoughtful look in his eyes.
Sometimes, because it's so secretive, I also suspect that the school is actually run by the federal government itself. It's just that we have no conclusive evidence of it.
Elijah Tanner's revelation gave Kevin a completely new perspective on the great powers. At the bottom of it all, his understanding of it was still too narrow, and he was intrigued by the possibility of realizing his full potential one day. If I have the chance, I'll definitely take the time to explore the great powers and challenge myself, Kevin thought to himself. The night passed quickly. Early the next morning, the noisy phone ringing woke Kevin up from his sleep. President Williams, it's me, Miss Wilson said apologetically. I'm so sorry to disturb your rest. Why did you call me so early in the morning? Did something happen in the company? Kevin asked worriedly. His tone was filled with annoyance that he'd been disturbed at the crack of dawn. Actually, there are no problems with the company. It's just that the Archer family's men keep calling to ask you to have dinner with their boss tonight. Miss Wilson immediately added, I was so busy handling some documents all night that I didn't pay attention to the time, and completely forgot about this matter. I'm sorry again, sir." "It's all right, Miss Wilson. I understand that there are many matters in the company that you have to attend to. You also need to take care of yourself and get some rest." Kevin then casually asked, "Is it Dominic Archer or Gwen Archer who wants to treat me to a meal?" "It's Dominic Archer," Miss Wilson replied respectfully. "Okay, I got it. Tell Dominic Archer that I'll wait for him in the Salix Leaf Hotel tonight at 7 o'clock. Kevin hung up the phone, got up from his bed, and walked towards the window. As he looked at the scenery outside, his eyes gradually narrowed as he wondered what Dominic wanted to see him for. This meal was obviously not just an ordinary dinner. After all, he'd already instructed Drake Cook to help him take control of Chicago, and Dominic Archer currently remained the greatest obstacle to reaching that goal. Given that the Archer family had been a powerful influence in Chicago for many years, should he get rid of them or use them to further his own plans in the future? As far as Kevin was concerned, this was definitely a question worth thinking about. In the Radiance's branch in St. Louis, Dylan Hill warmly invited Richard Swinton to sit down on a chair. In order to ease the tension with St. Louis's citizens, Alfred Dixon and his brothers had quietly left the city and transferred over to the Radiance's headquarters under the lead of Julia Hill, leaving Dylan Hill and his other 3 siblings in charge of guarding the newly constructed branch.
"Mr. Swinton, I'm really flattered that you came here so early in the morning."
Dylan Hill immediately ordered his men to serve them some coffee. Because of all the help that Richard Swinton provided to the Radiance since they entered St. Louis, as well as his personal relationship with Kevin, he had earned Dylan Hill's respect.
"Mr. Hill, you're too polite. Since Kevin is a member of the Radiance and also my adopted son, I consider you all a part of my extended family."
Richard Swinton took a sip of coffee, hesitated for a moment, then continued.
"Actually, I came here today because I have a bold request. I heard that the Radiance has a way to concoct the power pill. Given this, I was wondering if you can provide the Swinton family with some of them to allow the people of our family to improve their strength. In the future, we can be even more useful in helping you fight against the Pinnacle."
Dylan Hill's facial expression changed slightly when he heard this, but the smile on his face didn't go away.
"Mr. Swinton, you might not know this, but Mr. Williams is actually the one in charge of the pill planning and allocation for the Radiance. Moreover, he and the Chancellor are sworn friends, so if you want some power pills, just ask him,"
Dylan explained in a low voice. Aside from being a big guy with a muscular frame, Dylan was also a smart guy. On the one hand, he knew that the power pill served as the foundation of the Radiance's strength. On the other hand, he was aware that Richard Swinton wasn't someone whom he could offend. In this case, he might as well hand the entire matter over to Kevin, and whether he would decide to give Richard Swinton some power pills or not would be up to him to decide.
"I see."
Although Richard Swinton had an enlightened look on his face, he was still deeply shocked. Although he knew that Kevin was a member of the Radiance, Richard Swinton had previously thought that his position was only slightly higher than Dylan Hill and his siblings. Who knew that Kevin was actually the one who managed the distribution of all the pills throughout the whole organization? From Dylan Hill's tone, Richard Swinton could even conclude that Kevin's position to the Radiance was probably second only to the Chancellor himself, Kenneth Wilkinson. In the parking lot of the Blue Water Export Company in Chicago, Lily had just parked her car and gotten out. Looking at the brand new pink Bugatti that Kevin had bought for her, she was suddenly reminded of something. Although Kevin had become rich now and was able to buy her anything she wanted, the number of times he returned home was also gradually decreasing as time went on. At the same time, she felt that the two of them were increasingly growing apart as well. Compared to their current situation, part of Lily preferred that Kevin would go back to being the useless piece of trash he was before. At least that way he could always stay by her side. After shaking off this thought and composing herself, Lily finally walked towards the company building. Given that this was the first day of her new job, she couldn't afford to make any mistakes. However, as soon as she entered, someone immediately walked over to her. "You're our new intern, aren't you? Go and tidy this place up right away. I'll arrange some other tasks for you shortly." Lily was stunned when she heard this. She wasn't expecting to work there as someone's intern. "What are you still standing there for? Didn't you understand a word of what I said?" The woman seemed disappointed. "If you don't want to work for this company, just quit your job and leave the building immediately." The woman's outburst attracted the attention of many people, but none of them stood up to defend Lily, and they all pretended to be busy with other work-related matters. Who was this cold and arrogant woman? She was none other than Lori Bramler, Director Sid Bramler's sister, who also happened to be the assistant manager of the Human Resources Department. Because she was known to have a very bad temper, very few people in the company dared to provoke her. "Is there a mistake? I wasn't hired as an intern. I actually applied for the project design manager position," Lily insisted timidly. Since she'd just joined the company, she made sure not to offend Lori Bramler, so she chose her words carefully. Otherwise, she was afraid that she would make a bad impression on her fellow coworkers. "Who told you that the project design department was recruiting people? Don't you know who I am? I'm the HR department's assistant manager, and as far as I'm concerned, our company is only hiring interns at the moment. So if you want the job, get to work immediately. If not, then get the hell out of this office." Lori Bramler got a nasty look on her face as she put her hands on her hips. At the moment, she didn't seem like a company manager at all. With the sour expression on her face, she looked more like the Wicked Witch of the West. As soon as Lily entered the Blue Water Export Company, a woman immediately walked over to her. Her identity was revealed to be Sid Bramler's sister, Lori, an assistant manager in the Human Resources Department who was known for her bad temper. Thinking that Lily was the company's new intern, she ordered her to tidy the place up. Stunned by this, Lily carefully explained that she wasn't an intern and that she'd applied as a project design manager. However, Lori stated that the company was only hiring interns at the moment. Then she angrily told Lily she should quit if she didn't want the job. "Are you going to clean this place or not?" Lori Bramler demanded harshly. "Yes." Lily's face was slightly red as she lowered her head and replied. Even if she felt that being an intern was completely beneath her, she really needed a job, not for anything else but to be able to prove her worth to Kevin. Despite her current position, she decided to keep her head down and slowly work her way to the top. And when the time came, she would be able to stand in front of Kevin as a successful person in her own right. With that, it took her more than an hour to clean up the office area with a broom and a mop. However, as soon as she had finished, a series of endless menial tasks followed. "Hey, new girl, would you get me a glass of water? I'm currently tied up in an online Zoom meeting," someone ordered. "I have a document here that I need to print right away. I'm in a hurry, so don't waste my precious time," another employee demanded. One by one, the other employees continued to come up with small excuses just to disturb Lily. All of this suddenly made her think of Kevin. When had he ever been willing to let her do these kinds of things? Didn't he usually volunteer to do all the cooking and cleaning at home? As her heart became filled with resentment, Lily's eyes gradually turned red. She came here to work on actual projects that would help the Blue Water Export Company's business, not to be bullied and ordered around by the other employees. Suddenly, Sid Bramler walked over to her carrying his briefcase. His swollen face immediately attracted everyone's attention. "Director Bramler, what happened to your face? Who would dare to do such a thing to you?" one of the employees asked with some concern. A flash of awkwardness appeared on Sid Bramler's face. "This is nothing. I just walked into some trouble last night. You don't have to worry about it." Everyone speculated on what he meant. Was Sid Bramler mugged by some robbers? Did he drunkenly start a bar fight? Could his wife have caught him having an affair? Suddenly, Sid Bramler noticed Lily, who was standing beside the water cooler and filling several glasses of water.
Mrs. Williams, why are you getting water for everyone?
Sid's heart skipped a beat. Isn't this the job you hired me for? Someone told me that the project design department wasn't recruiting managers after all. Lily sounded very dejected. Sid Bramler suddenly remembered that during the interview he dangled the project design manager position because he thought it would entice her enough to do anything just to get the job. And when she didn't fall for his tricks, he still hired her with plans to seduce her at some point. However, the reality was that their company really had no openings aside from interns.
Wait, all right then. Keep up the good work.
Sid stammered in reply, then he quickly walked into his office. As he was doing so, he secretly observed Lily's every move through the small crack in the door, which he'd left ajar. He soon found that she'd been ordered around and bullied by several other employees.
I'm screwed. What should I do?
Sid anxiously paced back and forth in his office.
If she goes home and complains about this to Mr. Williams later tonight, I'm a dead man.
All of a sudden, Sid Bramler heard a noise. He quickly leaned against the door once again and saw that Lily had just accidentally dropped a pile of documents. A male employee who was leaning back in his chair shook his head and scolded her.
What did you just do, you stupid intern? Do you know how important these documents are? The finance department still has to process all these bills. If you delay them any further, they'll deduct their overtime pay from your paycheck.
I'm sorry, I didn't do it on purpose. Lily hurriedly bent down and picked up the documents. Tears were starting to well up in her eyes. Before the other employee could say anything, Sid Bramler rushed out of the door almost immediately and slammed his hands on the man's desk.
Shane Dawkins, what the hell do you think you're doing? How many times have I told you? This company is a family and everyone should treat each other with the utmost respect. How can you bully your coworker like this?
Everyone was caught off guard by this, including Lily. Was this the same Sid Bramler that they all knew?
Mr. Dawkins, based on your actions just now, I can tell that I've greatly misjudged your character. Because of this, I can't allow you to stay employed in this company any longer, so get out of here right now. We don't need a bad influence like you around here.
Sid quickly made the decision to fire him and gestured towards the exit.
Director Bramler, how could you fire me just like that?
Shane Dawkins didn't have time to react.
You're asking me why? Don't you see how hardworking and responsible Mrs. Williams has been? Look at how clean the office is, as well as how neatly printed and arranged these documents are.
Sid Bramler then pointed to the water cooler and said,
I even noticed how focused and careful she was when she was filling all those glasses of water for everyone. She may have only been given small tasks to do on her first day as an intern, but all of her actions fully prove that Mrs. Williams is an excellent addition to the company. And now that you've been fired, I'm going to let her take over your position.
These words made everyone feel dizzy. What the hell was going on? Weren't Sid Bramler's reasons too shallow and far-fetched? Why was he suddenly acting like such a morally righteous person today? However, some of the older employees seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly voiced their agreement. Someone stood up from her seat and praised her performance. I think what Director Bramler said is right. The new intern has indeed been very diligent with the work that she's been assigned.
I just can't bear to step on the floor with my shoes on for fear of messing up the great cleaning job she just did.
Another employee added as he took off his shoes and put them inside his desk drawer.
No matter what task she was given, she never complained. By setting such a good example for everyone here, we must tell the Human Resources Department to use her as a standard for hiring future employees.
A third one gave her his seal of approval. Just then, Lori Bramler, who'd heard all the commotion, came over to see what was going on. After finding out what had happened, she was stunned and didn't know how to react.
Mr. Dawkins, take your belongings and turn your desk over to Mrs. Williams immediately.
Sid thought for a while and then waved his hand at his sister Lori.
Come with me to my office.
When she heard this, Lily was very excited. She didn't expect to get promoted so quickly. Inside his office, Sid Bramler was sitting on the sofa as he rubbed his forehead hard. After what he had just done, he felt relieved to have salvaged the situation. However, Lori Bramler was very confused. "Sid, why are you being so partial to our new intern? Don't tell me you've taken a liking to her."
"Shut up, sis. Don't speak such nonsense."
Sid lightly scolded her as he quickly jumped up from the sofa. Then he walked over to the door and looked around cautiously. After making sure that no one was nearby, he quietly closed the door. "What's going on, Sid?" Lori asked again. Given her notorious temper, Lori Bramler specialized in making the lives of the new hires a living hell, so that they knew their place and would be disciplined employees in the future.
"Well, since you're the assistant manager of our human resources department, I'm not afraid to tell you the truth," Sid sighed deeply. "You know that our company was recently acquired by someone, right?"
"I heard about some—" Lori was halfway through her sentence when she seemed to have thought of something and opened her eyes wide in surprise. "Wait, was she the reason why you got beaten up so badly?"
"That's right. Mrs. Williams is the wife of our new boss, and now that she started working here, you have to keep your eyes on her. You can't treat her like your other new hire, so make sure that she doesn't file any grievances with the company. Otherwise, both of us will have to suffer the consequences," Sid warned her earnestly. "If you provoke her anger, don't blame me for not helping you when the time comes. After all, our new boss is none other than the CEO of the Williams Company."
Hearing this, Lori Bramler felt as if she'd been struck by lightning. Recalling her previous attitude towards Lily, she gulped nervously, and her hands and feet started to turn cold. Before her brother had time to say anything else to her, Lori Bramler immediately turned around and ran out of his office. She went straight over to Lily, who was starting to familiarize herself with the particulars of her new job. When the other employees saw Lori Bramler quickly approaching, they wanted to call Lily's attention to give her a heads up, but they held back and opted not to say anything for fear of drawing Lori's anger. "Mrs. Williams, I'm so sorry." Lori stood in front of Lily and bowed her head. "I would like to apologize for my snippy attitude towards you earlier. I was just having a bad day and I didn't mean to disrespect you at all. I hope you can forgive me for my blunder." The office suddenly quieted down. Knowing Lori Bramler's reputation as a hothead within the company, did she actually just apologize to this new hire? As everyone gawked at her in disbelief, they all felt that they were stuck in a dream. I'm not angry with you at all." Lily didn't understand Lori Bramler's actions in the least. "Okay, I was just making sure that I didn't offend you, Mrs. Williams. Anyway, if you need anything, just tell the others. And if there's anything you don't understand about your new job, you can just call me and I'll gladly answer all of your questions." Lori secretly exhaled, then turned to the other employees and sternly warned them. "Mrs. Williams is a very outstanding employee. If any of you dare to bully her, be careful. Director Bramler and I won't let you off the hook. Let Mr. Dawkins's firing serve as an example to you all." For a moment, no one could understand what had just happened. First, it was Sid Bramler who seemed to be out of character, and now even Lori Bramler was acting strange as well. After Sid Bramler revealed to his sister that the Blue Water Export Company had just been acquired by the CEO of the Williams Company and that he also happened to be Lily's husband, Lori Bramler immediately ran out of his office to apologize to Lily. Relieved that Lily wasn't angry with her, Lori then gave a stern warning to everyone, telling them that they would have to deal with her and Sid Bramler if they were caught bullying Lily. This left the other employees in disbelief as they wondered why both siblings were suddenly acting so out of character because of Lily. Everyone who worked at the Blue Water Export Company knew very well what kind of person Lori Bramler was. She wasn't afraid of anyone, and there were times when even President Hartman wasn't spared from her wrath. So why did she suddenly feel a need to apologize to a new employee? This was certainly a first. By now, some of the smarter employees had begun to connect the dots. From the way Sid Bramler had treated Lily with special concern earlier, they could already tell that something was different about her. And Lori Bramler's actions just now had fully confirmed that there must be someone powerful backing Lily. Whoever it was, they were pretty sure that the person had a very high position in the company.
Mrs. Williams, don't worry. I'll take care of you in the future. If you need anything from now on, just let me know and I'll handle it for you,"
one of her coworkers offered. "Mrs. Williams, are you free at noon? Let's have lunch together. I'll introduce you to everyone to ensure that you have a warm welcome," another employee said very graciously. Almost all the employees in the office suddenly went over to Lily and profusely showered her with warm greetings and compliments. On the top floor of the Whistler Hotel, Mitchell Cook was sitting on a sofa with a sunken face. Meanwhile, Drake Cook was standing in front of him timidly, looking like a child who just broke in a vase and was waiting to be scolded by one of his parents.
"You're very brave, son. As soon as you were discharged from the hospital, you already dared to make such a daring move against Dominic Archer by destroying several of his properties. Why didn't you run this idea by me first? Do you think you're old and strong enough to make decisions without your father's approval?"
Mitchell Cook said very gravely. His tone was so cold that it instantly made Drake shudder.
"Dad, it was an urgent situation. I didn't have enough time to inform you."
Drake Cook lowered his head and stared at the floor, not daring to look his father in the eye. Mitchell Cook closed his eyes for a moment, and his eyebrows furrowed as he angrily pondered the current situation in Chicago. Ever since the Steele family had suffered a great loss in their strength, only Drake Cook and Dominic Archer were left standing. However, both of them usually kept their fights private and on a smaller scale to avoid causing alarm to ordinary citizens, as well as to not disrupt any big businesses. Given that this was the first time that Drake Cook had instigated such a huge public disturbance, several of Chicago's influential figures immediately called Mitchell Cook to ask why they hadn't discussed this with them before the incident took place.
"How could you do such a reckless thing? Do you know how big of an impact your actions could potentially cause for the entire city if Dominic Archer decided to wage an all-out war with you?"
Mitchell took a deep breath and sighed disapprovingly.
"I don't think you realize what's at stake here."
Although Drake Cook was a very notorious and feared public figure, he still had to answer to Mitchell Cook behind closed doors. After all, he was the one who supported his son all these years. And if he was unhappy with something that Drake did, he could easily push him down and tear him apart.
It wasn't my idea. I was just following Mr. Williams' orders. He came to the hospital to see me shortly before I was discharged. He promised that if I could unify Chicago's underground scene for him, he'd give me a chance to become stronger and help me achieve great things in the future."
Drake sucked it up and admitted the truth.
"This was Kevin's order?"
Mitchell was slightly stunned and immediately asked him,
"How can I be sure that you're not lying to me, son?"
Drake Cook's eyes grew wide when he heard that. He quickly knelt on the floor and answered,
"Dad, you know me. I'd never have the guts to lie to you, especially about something like this."
Mitchell Cook looked at him seriously for a few seconds. Then he took out his phone and called Kevin's number. In his penthouse at Corwin Tower, Kevin had just finished refining a batch of pills and was about to give some to the Tanner brothers when his phone suddenly rang. "What's wrong, Mitchell?" Kevin asked curiously.
"Kevin, you finally answered."
Mitchell Cook had called him more than a dozen times, but Kevin had left his phone on silent while he was busy concocting the pills. "Did something happen?" Kevin asked worriedly.
"Kevin, I just want to ask you something. Did you order Drake to do this?"
Mitchell Cook asked straightforwardly. There was no need for them to hide anything from each other. "I'm assuming he told you about it. Anyway, what happened? Did he run into any trouble?" Kevin asked with some concern. In the future, Chicago wouldn't be his only territory. After dealing with the Pinnacle, he planned to explore the rest of the Great Power sooner or later, which meant that he would be away from the city even more than he had already been lately. But before embarking on that journey, he wanted to ensure that both Chicago and Detroit would solidly be under his control. While there was no way that anything could happen to the Radiants in Detroit with both the Hill and Hayes families gone, he still needed to leave Chicago in the hands of someone he could trust. And with the likes of Mitchell Cook, Adriana Wright, and his other allies already being deeply rooted in the hearts of the people as influential business leaders, there was only one person that he could choose. But if Drake Cook failed to carry out his plans, Kevin might really have to make a move against Dominic Archer himself.
No, he didn't fail. In fact, Drake is full of energy after destroying 7 or 8 of Dominic Archer's properties in one night,
Mitchell Cook explained candidly.
But Kevin, if you're planning to do something of similar magnitude again in the future, can you let me know first? That way I can at least be mentally prepared for what's about to come, especially if our businesses will be potentially affected.
Mitchell, were you really scared by such a small spectacle? All right, I admit I was a bit too rash and reckless. I'll definitely inform you guys ahead of time in the future. Kevin couldn't help but laugh.
Kevin, let us take care of this matter first. After that, you can give us any instructions on what to do next.
Mitchell Cook cut off the call more abruptly than usual. Kevin put away the phone and his eyes lit up. He'd really misjudged Drake Cook. Perhaps he could really be trusted after all. He finally figured out why Dominic Archer wanted to have dinner with him. He must have known for some time now that Drake Cook was acting on his behalf. Time passed quickly. At 6:30 in the evening, Kevin brought both Elijah and Yale Tanner along with him as they left Corwin Tower. After driving for half an hour, they finally arrived at the Salix Leaf Hotel, and when they were about to enter, no one came to cause trouble for him this time. By then, Kevin's previous incident with security had already spread throughout the upper class of Chicago. As a result, Rachel Collins made sure that everyone who worked at the hotel knew who their owner was and what he looked like. Under the warm and respectful welcome of 2 hotel staff members, Kevin was escorted to a private room on the 8th floor. In order to show how serious he was, Dominic Archer had generously booked the entire floor, and the corridor was filled with his men. It was normal for him to be extra vigilant whenever he went out in public for special occasions. "Dominic, it's been a while." Kevin pushed the door open and greeted him with a smile.
President Williams, I'm sorry that I suddenly invited you on such short notice. Thank you for finding the time to have dinner with me.
Dominic Archer waved his hand and signaled the other people in the room to leave immediately.
And these 2 are?
Dominic's gaze fell on Elijah and Yale Tanner. He instinctively felt a bit concerned because he could sense a powerful aura coming from the 2 of them. "They're with me. I hope you don't mind," Kevin said casually. "Anyway, I know you're a very busy man, so I was surprised when I found out that you wanted to treat me to a meal. Is it really just to have a drink with me?" Kevin didn't wait for Dominic Archer to respond and sat down at the table. Then he poured himself a glass of red wine and took a sip. "A 2009 Chateau Haut-Brion. You have good taste, Dominic," Kevin exclaimed. Elijah and Yale Tanner didn't sit down beside Kevin and just stood behind him instead. At the moment, their eyes were locked on Dominic Archer, as if to silently warn him to not have any harmful thoughts. Otherwise, all of his henchmen waiting outside wouldn't provide enough protection against the 2 brothers.
President Williams, I can sense that you want me to get straight to the point, so I won't keep you waiting anymore. Besides, I think you already know why I wanted to meet with you tonight, so I just want to hear your answer," Dominic said as he lit a cigar for himself. He didn't want to waste much time dancing around the matter either. Kevin glanced at him and inquired, "Is my response really that important?" Dominic took a deep breath and then told Kevin exactly what he had on his mind. "It's not good for you to bully us like this, don't you think? If you really want to be partners with me, you just need to say the word and I can immediately share with you all the resources I have. I'll even round up some of my men and we can leave Chicago to help you with your future plans outside of this city." You don't have to use these underhanded tactics behind the scenes to get my attention.
How can it be considered a dirty trick? While Drake Cook is a notorious and feared figure, at least I can be assured that he won't stab me in the back. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for you, Kevin replied indifferently.
President Williams, if your mind has already been made up, then there's no need for us to talk any further about it tonight. That being said, my men have been curious to see your fighting skills.
Dominic's face gradually darkened. Seeing himself as the king of Chicago's underworld for many years, Dominic Archer wasn't accustomed to having anyone show such disdain for him. And despite all his efforts tonight just to get into Kevin's good graces and secure a mutually beneficial partnership with him, he didn't see Kevin offering him the same courtesy. Dominic's patience was wearing thin because of this insulting behavior. Is that so? Are you calling me out to a fight then? Kevin asked him with a mischievous smile. The atmosphere in the private room suddenly became tense. To be honest, if they fought, Dominic Archer wasn't sure if he could hold a candle to Kevin. However, he was also not a pushover who could easily be bullied.
President Williams, is there really no room for negotiation?
Dominic couldn't help but break the silence. Don't you still have your own underworld organization to run? I heard you've been acquiring several properties that the Steele family lost. Kevin asked very directly. While I'm not looking to be partners with anyone, I wonder if you're interested in joining me for an interesting venture.
I'm used to the freedom of being my own boss. I can't stand following someone else's rules and being ordered around.
Dominic took a puff of his cigar and deliberately blew the smoke in Kevin's direction. When he saw this, Elijah Tanner slightly narrowed his eyes and took a step forward. But just as he was about to make a move, Kevin stopped him. Dominic, are you sure about that? A golden opportunity like this doesn't come around every day. There are some things that you have to consider first before giving me your final answer. Kevin replied in a very cool and calculating tone of voice. When he met with Kevin at the Salix Leaf Hotel, Dominic wanted to know if he was interested in a mutually beneficial partnership, and he offered to share all his men and resources with him. But since Kevin already had Drake Cook as a trusted aide, he didn't see any need for Dominic, who he felt would just stab him in the back. When Dominic asked whether there was still any room for negotiation, Kevin offered him the opportunity to work under him as his subordinate. However, Dominic refused because he valued his freedom and didn't want to have to answer to anyone. Kevin then advised him to carefully consider his offer before making his final decision. The meaning behind Kevin's words was very clear. On the one hand, it was almost impossible for Kevin to convince Dominic Archer to be his subordinate. However, he understood that this was also part of human nature. As long as a person had already reached the top of something, he would never give up the view from above. Because of this, it was rare for someone like Dominic to swallow their pride and willingly stoop down to listen to someone else's orders. And even then, there would have to be a very compelling reason for them to agree. For example, Alfred Dixon, Dylan Hill, and all of their siblings had only followed Kevin because they had nowhere else to go. Meanwhile, Elijah Tanner and his brothers were only tempted to switch sides because they were seeking a better future for themselves. However, Dominic Archer's situation was very different. As a casual expert with a low power base, he had no desire to become a powerful warrior. On top of that, with his current status, prestige, and wealth in Chicago, he had all that he could ever ask for. So as long as he didn't do anything that would bring about his own downfall, he could spend the rest of his life freely as his own boss. If you're at peace with your decision, then I have nothing else to say to you. Kevin gently swirled his glass of red wine. As for the final outcome after tonight, it shall be decided when you and Drake face each other head-on.
President Williams, why don't you stay a little longer in Chicago so that we can have a chance to meet again? That way, when I'm done dealing with Drake Cook, we won't have to waste any time or resources just to find one another since we'll both be in the city. There's no need to play hide and seek.
Dominic Archer's face had turned sour and his breathing started to become more rapid. "Be careful what you wish for, Dominic. It's not like I didn't give you a chance to be on my side. I guess you don't cherish your life as much as I thought you did." Kevin's tone was filled with pity.
"If that's the case, aren't you afraid that you won't be able to leave this room alive tonight? After all, those people waiting outside the door are all my men."
Dominic leaned back on the sofa, his eyebrows slightly furrowed. His body became extremely tense all of a sudden. Even though Dominic Archer hadn't intended to start a conflict with Kevin, the outcome of their meeting was already quite obvious. Neither side was willing to give way to the other's absolute conditions, and it was hopeless to continue talking about the matter. At that moment, the atmosphere in the room had suddenly dropped to its coldest level, along with a hint of murderous intent that was gradually growing in intensity. And as they stared each other down in silence, life and death could only be decided by a single thought or move from either of them. After a minute or so, Kevin gently put the wine glass back on the table, and there was a mischievous smile on his face. "If that's the way you want to settle this issue, be my guest. Give it a try. Let's see if you can really keep me here for long." With that, Elijah and Yale Tanner took a step forward at the same time, ready to kill Dominic Archer as soon as Kevin gave them the signal. Given their strength as level 5 experts, dealing with Dominic Archer would be a piece of cake for them. As for all of those big strong men outside the room, they wouldn't be able to do anything to them either.
"Are you really not afraid, President Williams?"
Dominic's pupil suddenly widened. He at least wanted to see a trace of fear in Kevin's eyes. However, Kevin remained as calm and composed as ever. "Why would I be afraid? Just hit me with your best shot." Kevin stood up from his chair and tidied his clothes. "No matter what tricks you have up your sleeve, I'm confident that the three of us will leave this room unharmed tonight." Suddenly, Dominic Archer let out a deep sigh.
"President Williams, why do you need to do this? Can't you leave me a way out?"
"You've guessed correctly that my ambitions go far beyond Chicago, but I still need it as a stable base that I can keep coming back to. After all, I consider this city to be my home," Kevin explained frankly without changing his expression. "I already gave you a way out, and if you had taken that opportunity, it would have allowed you to live a better life. But because you rejected my offer, you must now pay the price."
"President Williams, you're forcing me to do this."
Dominic Archer suddenly took out the gun from his waist and pointed it directly at Kevin. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became incredibly tense as the two of them stared each other down. At the same time, Elijah and Yale Tanner bravely stepped in front of Kevin, as if to give a final warning to Dominic Archer not to do anything reckless. With all of his men outside the door, it was too late for Dominic Archer to back down and call for reinforcements. Because he was unwilling to swallow his pride no matter what, he decided to commit one last act of defiance. And as he pulled the trigger, Kevin simply closed his eyes while Elijah Tanner swiftly protected him. Dominic Archer's fate was in the hands of Yale Tanner, who decisively finished him off. In the Huxley family's mansion in St. Louis, the study was still brightly lit even though it was already late at night. Virgil Huxley sat on his chair and browsed through the report in his hand. If Kevin had been there, he would definitely have found out that over the course of just a few days, Virgil Huxley seemed to have aged more than 10 years, with deep bags under his eyes, as well as bright white hair covering the top of his head.
"Richard Swinton, Joseph Thompson. I've really underestimated the abilities of your two families."
Virgil Huxley rubbed his forehead tiredly. With the Thompson and Swinton families working together to thwart his plans, it had become extremely difficult for the Huxley family to keep holding on to their power, as both their resources and funds were shrinking rapidly by the day. Just as Virgil Huxley was going through the motions over his family's current situation, the window of the study suddenly opened. A second later, a shadowy figure quickly jumped inside.
"Why are you here?"
Virgil Huxley was stunned at first, then quickly stood up from his chair. He seemed to be at a loss for what to do next.
The Huxley family has been backed into a corner and is about to be crushed. As an ally, I naturally had to come and visit you.
The mysterious figure's tone would have made an ordinary person feel extremely uncomfortable.
With the Swinton and Thompson families joining forces, my family no longer has the strength and resources to reverse the situation,
Virgil Huxley admitted dejectedly.
As long as the Huxley family hasn't been completely destroyed, there's still some hope.
The mysterious figure reassured him.
This all starts and ends with Kevin Williams. As long as he dies, you'll have nothing to worry about. I've already sent some people to Chicago and they'll make sure that he disappears without a trace.
The night passed by quickly. The next morning, the citizens of Chicago had just woken up from their sleep when they heard the shocking news. An intense battle had taken place at the Salix Leaf Hotel the night before, and witnesses had heard several gunshots. But no one knew the final outcome because the entire hotel had been placed into lockdown. However, those people with a bit of power knew a little bit more about the tragic situation. More than 100 people had died miserably from the clash. Moreover, there were also reports that Drake Cook had suddenly attacked Dominic Archer's forces, and in just a day's time he had already taken over a significant portion of the Archer's family's properties. Because of this, everyone could vaguely feel that something big was happening behind the scenes in Chicago.
Kevin, from the moment we met, I already guessed that you're definitely not as ordinary as you appear to be. As expected, you were hiding something from us.
Brett Stewart sat on the sofa and said with a loud laugh, "Brett, you're flattering me too much. Compared to you, this is just a small matter that isn't really worth your attention," Kevin answered as he poured a cup of coffee for Brett Stewart. Earlier that morning, Brett Stewart had brought 2 guards with him to Corwin Tower. Despite the surprise visit, Kevin didn't find it strange at all.
Dalton is really an elusive guy. It wasn't easy for me to come all the way to Chicago, but that brother of ours is still nowhere to be found. Is he deliberately hiding from me or something?
Brett mentioned casually. When Brett said that, Kevin's hand suddenly trembled ever so subtly as he poured his friend a cup of coffee. Dalton Steele was still in the Radiance's headquarters, and Kevin was keeping him there as the safest place for him to recover from his injuries. Dalton was injured a while back, so I asked someone to save him and send him to the Radiance's headquarters to recuperate, Kevin replied bluntly. He knew that Brett Stewart was just pretending not to know about this. As the Supreme Commander of the Myriads, it would be a piece of cake for him to investigate something as simple as this. As expected, after hearing these words, Brett Stewart gave Kevin a deep look and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth.
I was just joking around, Kevin. Of course I heard that Dalton was badly injured, and the Williams family in New York was behind it.
Brett Stewart took a sip of his coffee and said,
Kevin, I know that you were also ostracized from the Williams family, but since you're still related to them, I understand that it's a weird situation for you. Since you're like a brother to me, let me handle the problem. I promise I'll definitely seek justice for the both of you.
Kevin was a little confused. He couldn't figure out what exactly Brett Stewart meant by this. At the same time, in the Williams family's mansion in New York, almost all the family elders were currently standing in the main hall. Thomas Williams, the family patriarch, was looking at Viola Garcia and Alan Baker with a proud smile on his face. The Williams family had joined the Myriads, and Thomas Williams had even offered to help set up one of their secret branches in New York City. Brett Stewart had paid Kevin a surprise visit at Corwin Tower. After briefly pretending not to know what had happened to Dalton Steele, Brett told Kevin that he knew that the Williams family was at fault for his friend's injuries, and since he was aware that Kevin had been expelled from the Williams family, Brett volunteered to handle the matter and seek justice for both of them. At the same time, in the Williams family's mansion, almost all of the family's elders were gathered in the main hall. Having previously joined the Myriads, Thomas Williams had a smile on his face as he looked at Viola Garcia and Alan Baker. While the Williams family had been discussing plans to set up a branch in New York, they told no one about their affiliation with the Myriads. However, the Myriads had never sent any of their higher-ups to New York, and now the two of their envoys had suddenly arrived so early in the morning, it was unknown whether the Williams family was fortunate or unlucky to be graced by their presence. Thomas Williams, as the patriarch of the Williams family, do you realize what error you've committed? Viola Garcia asked quietly. With her power base at the level 5 stage, she didn't really think much of the people in the Williams family. In fact, she thought they were just a bunch of ants who were unworthy of her time. Upon hearing this, Thomas Williams' entire body suddenly trembled.
I don't know. Please enlighten me, envoy.
Do you really not realize what you and your family did wrong? Viola's tone turned harsh. Along with her terrifying aura, the atmosphere in the entire hall became extremely tense. This was the difference between a true expert and a mere wannabe from the Williams family. While this was obviously the Williams family's territory, the aura that its family members collectively put out couldn't be compared to that of Viola Garcia and Alan Baker.
I really didn't know what our family has done wrong. Please, tell me.
Thomas's body kept trembling. He seemed to be on the verge of having a breakdown. At the same time, Laura Williams's face had also turned pale. No matter how ambitious and outspoken she usually was, she didn't have the courage to speak this time. She didn't dare to offend these two people out of fear. You guys are familiar with Dalton Steele, aren't you? Viola looked at each of the Williams family members one by one.
Yes, I do know him.
Thomas's heart skipped a beat. He subconsciously thought that something bad was about to happen. Not too long ago, the Steele family was attacked, and several of their members were captured and severely injured here in your mansion. Because of your collusion with the Union, the entire Steele family was humiliated. Now let me ask you again. Do you really know who Dalton Steele is? Viola asked him coldly. There was no need for her to mince words and play nice with the Williams family. After all, they weren't the only influential family in New York. If the Supreme Commander didn't want to keep them as members, he could just replace them with someone else. Thomas tried to answer as best as he could.
The Steele family is based in Chicago.
Dalton Steele is the only person who was ever mentored by the previous Supreme Commander.
Alan Baker forcefully interrupted Thomas before he could finish.
Although he hasn't officially entered the Myriads yet, his status in the organization is not something an ordinary member like you can compare with. Even the two of us have to be respectful when we see him, and we hold the rank of envoy.
Hearing Alan Baker's explanation, Thomas Williams started to shake again, so much so that he fell to his knees with a thud as sweat started dripping down from his forehead.
I absolutely didn't know anything about this. In fact, the truth is that it was actually the Union who forced us to take hostages into our homes. Because our family couldn't defeat the Union, we had no choice but to submit to them temporarily. Furthermore, they were the ones who humiliated the Steele family. No one in the Williams family ever participated in any of that,
Thomas replied hastily. With their family patriarch kneeling on the ground, how could the rest of the Williams family's members remain standing? They all quickly followed suit and knelt down with their heads bowed as well. Your family is really good at covering up your lies. On top of all that, Dalton Steele and the current Supreme Commander are also like brothers to one another. How dare you offend your superiors so blatantly? Viola shook her head in annoyance.
Tell me, how does your family want to die?
Alan didn't want to waste any more time talking nonsense with them. Meanwhile, in the meeting room of the Blue Water Export Company, the monthly company meeting was currently being held. Ralph Hartman would often make a big deal out of it, which usually made the meetings very tense. But today, the atmosphere was somehow different. Ralph Hartman was continuously praising Lily nonstop. When the other employees realized that he'd been talking for almost 2 hours, they were all puzzled. However, there were some employees who were more discerning. The day before, both Sid and Lori Bramler's actions had seemed very unusual. And now Ralph Hartman's actions definitely proved one thing. Lily was definitely someone with serious connections. Why else would they act like this with her?
Everyone, look at how carefully this document was prepared. Clearly it was made by someone who's too overqualified to be stuck in the role of an ordinary employee. Therefore, I've decided to promote Lily to the position of manager of the project design department in order to create a brighter future for the company.
Ralph Hartman heaved a huge sigh of relief now that he'd figured out how to promote Lily openly.
I knew she'd be a great asset to the company after I interviewed her. I firmly agree with your decision.
Sid Bramler was the first to stand up and show his support. The night before, the two of them had spent a long time discussing the situation before they finally thought of this approach to deal with Kevin's order, that Lily had better not complain to him about her new job at the company. On that note, the 3-hour meeting finally ended, and the other employees couldn't help but secretly sigh in relief. Ralph Hartman had rambled on for hours before finally returning to what he said at the very beginning of the meeting. At the same time, Lily finally came back to her senses after being fawned over by her bosses. It was as if all of this was a dream.
Good luck in your new position, Director Williams,
one of the employees exclaimed. Director Williams, I'll be your assistant from now on. If you need anything, feel free to ask me for help. Her new assistant smiled at her.
Director Williams, I'm also a member of the project design department. With you in charge, I have nothing to be afraid of.
One of her teammates gushed. A large group of coworkers scrambled to speak as they all tried to make a good impression on Lily. Meanwhile, while staying behind in the meeting room, Ralph Hartman and Sid Bramler wiped the sweat off their foreheads at the same time.
We now have another problem in front of us. The KWTD Corporation has an upcoming project in Chicago, and I think our company can secure the winning bid for it, Sid said hesitantly. Such an important project should be discussed with the manager of the project design department, but Mrs. Williams... You're worried that she isn't capable enough, right? Ralph read his thoughts at first glance. Mrs. Williams may have a good family background, but this is an important business matter. But also, you and I are both very clear that if there's anything that makes her unhappy, she'll surely complain about it to Mr. Williams when she gets home.
Sid had a very unpleasant look on his face. While the two of them weren't necessarily afraid of Lily, they were worried that Kevin would punish them as soon as he found out that his wife had been wronged.
President Hartman, if we don't let Lily handle this, it could make it seem that we think she isn't good enough to be the project design department's manager, Sid added. Then I think we should let her give it a try, no matter what the outcome is. After all, Mr. Williams owns the company now. As long as it doesn't affect our interests, that's fine with me. If she fails to win the bid for the project, we should just let him deal with it.
Ralph was quite satisfied with his decision. Although the company wasn't his anymore, he still wanted to prove to Kevin that Lily wasn't suited to handle important business matters. And if Kevin wanted the Blue Water Export Company to be managed well, he would have to entrust Ralph Hartman to do it rather than his wife. Back in Corwin Tower, Kevin and Brett Stewart were sitting on the sofa as they continued their chat. Then their conversation turned serious.
Kevin, tell me the truth. Are you really the one who refines all the power pills for the Radiants?
Although Brett Stewart already had a feeling this was true, he still wanted to hear Kevin admit it. Brett, the two of us are like brothers, so I have nothing to hide from you. You're right. I'm definitely the one who refines all of the Radiance's power pills. However, it's up to the Chancellor to decide who the power pills are for, Kevin replied straightforwardly. When he heard this, Brett nodded his head in understanding. He didn't doubt Kevin's reply. Then he thought of another thing.
Kevin, I know that you have plans to take control of Chicago, and I didn't come here to fight over it with you. But now that you've dealt with Dominic Archer, we must get rid of the Alliance next.
Why? Kevin asked a little anxiously. The Alliance wasn't an organization that could easily be destroyed. If they were to make a move against them, it might cause an all-out war between the two groups, and this would have severe consequences for everyone concerned. Brett suddenly became serious. He lowered his voice and said, "I've received news that the Alliance has aligned itself with the Pinnacle." "What?" Kevin widened his eyes and stood up from the sofa. "I know it's surprising, but it's true. I've verified this information over and over." Brett sighed. Obviously, he didn't want to believe that this was true either. As they continued to chat in Corwin Tower, Brett Stewart asked Kevin if he was the one who refined all the power pills for the Radiants, wanting to hear him admit it himself. Kevin did, but maintained that the Chancellor was in charge of deciding who would be given the pills. When he heard this, Brett nodded his head and then shifted the topic to talk about how they must get rid of the Alliance. Knowing that this wouldn't be an easy task and would have severe consequences, Brett revealed that the Alliance had aligned itself with the Pinnacle. Kevin was shocked to hear this news. In its current state, the Pinnacle was already very powerful. If more forces joined their side, the chances of the Foundation successfully defending the continent against their attempts to return would even be slimmer. After closing his eyes for a few moments, Kevin suddenly thought of something as he slowly raised his head and looked at Brett Stewart. The Myriads is also a big organization with many enemies in the Great Powers. Did you ever consider aligning yourself with the Pinnacle as well? Kevin asked him with a peculiar look on his face. "You don't have to worry about that happening. While it's true that the Myriads don't see eye to eye with the top 10 schools and the rest of the others, you know I highly value the contents of the will that was left behind by Travis Adams. So I'll never do anything that would betray the Foundation. After all, there's no greater enemy than the Pinnacle at the moment." Brett Stewart reassured him very honestly. "That's good, Brett. I just worry that there may be others within the Great Powers who are thinking of joining forces with the Pinnacle as well." Kevin sighed. "I know what you mean, Kevin. Actually, the reason why I decided to temporarily abandon our headquarters was that we discovered a couple of rogue experts spying nearby on behalf of the Pinnacle. However, as soon as they were caught, they immediately killed themselves. And when I sent people to investigate the matter, the spies no longer had any surviving family members that we could use to gather more information." Kevin was very concerned about this. According to what Stewart had just told him, the trail of clues that could lead to finding out the Pinnacle's plans had been abruptly cut off. Just how many experts and schools in total had switched sides and joined the Pinnacle? This was a very fatal problem. Without having a clear picture of what they were up against, it was like the Great Powers had poisonous snakes lurking in the shadows, ready to bite without warning. "Kevin, you can't worry too much about this right now. While we can know for certain who our allies and enemies are within the Great Powers, we have to trust that there will always be a path of victory ahead for the Foundation. Besides, I believe that those who have decided to seek refuge in the Pinnacle must be in the minority. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to resort to using such underhanded methods." Brett seemed to have seen through Kevin's thoughts and comforted him gently. As Kevin nodded his head in understanding, a cold stream of air suddenly swept across his body, causing the hairs all over his body to stand up. "What's wrong?" Brett asked as he got up from the sofa. The entire penthouse became quiet as Kevin started looking around vigilantly. "I can sense someone's violent aura nearby. Prepare yourselves." Kevin called out to the Tanner brothers who were standing guard outside the door. However, when no one replied to him even after a few minutes, Kevin was puzzled. Given the strength of the Tanner brothers, it was obvious that something must have happened to them. "Something's not right." Brett Stewart urged Kevin to check on them. The two of them walked out of the hall one after the other, and when Brett opened the door, he and Kevin were shocked at what they saw. The 5 Tanner brothers, along with the 2 guards that Brett Stewart brought with him, had all fallen unconscious in the corridor. "Who's there? Come out if you have the guts to face us," Kevin shouted. However, he was met with silence, and no one showed himself in front of them. Brett Stewart's body tensed up as the spiritual energy in his body circulated at high speed. He slowly walked over to his guards and checked their condition. After that, he quickly checked the injuries of the Tanner brothers.
This is strange. There are no external injuries and no signs of fighting. Whoever did this must have attacked very quickly. Their attackers knocked them out almost all at the same time.
Brett concluded with a worried expression. Kevin prudently pulled out the night dagger from his pocket as his body emitted a powerful aura. May I know which experts have arrived to pay me a visit? Why don't you show yourselves? Let me greet my guests properly. You would be mistaken to think that I don't have any manners, Kevin said sternly. The result was still the same. No one answered him. A few more minutes passed. After they confirmed that there was no one around, Kevin and Brett decided to carry their men into the penthouse one after another. Just then, as the two of them were about to turn around, they heard a series of whooshing sounds as 9 knives suddenly flew through the air in their direction. Being able to react quickly, Kevin immediately threw Yale Tanner over to Brett Stewart. Then he turned around and released a wave of spiritual energy that protected his body. At the same time, he held the night dagger tightly in his hand. Less than a second later, Kevin managed to cut all the flying knives in half, making a crisp sound that echoed through the apartment. Immediately afterward, a dark green smoke started to fill the corridor.
Kevin, be careful!
Brett quickly waved his hand and released a wave of energy to protect Elijah Tanner and the others. What's this green fog? It looks poisonous. Kevin's expression instantly became extremely uneasy. He quickly retreated and struck out with his palm at the same time. He tried to use his strength to create a gust of wind that would blow away the poisonous fog, but it had hardly any effect at all as the fog continued to approach them. We must go inside quickly, Kevin shouted. Before the fog could penetrate into the penthouse, he had to make sure that everyone was inside before it reached the door. Kevin and Brett Stewart had already brought Yale Tanner and one of the two guards inside. However, they had to keep defending themselves against a continuous stream of flying knives that were aimed in their direction. As the entire corridor was about to be filled with the green fog, Kevin and Brett could barely see the faces of Elijah Tanner and the others anymore. Brett, use your spiritual energy to keep creating gusts of wind with your palms. You must not let the knives and poisonous fog enter the penthouse, Kevin instructed as he held his breath and rushed out to save the other men. As soon as he found Elijah Tanner and the others amidst the green fog, he quickly patted their clothes before carrying each one of them into the penthouse. When all of their men were finally inside, Kevin called Brett to retreat quickly and he finally closed the door. By then, their clothes had almost been completely eaten away by the green fog. What a powerful poison! Brett's pupils suddenly widened. Until now, I've only heard about the scariness of the green snake poison, but I see that it's really potent and unusual. Kevin didn't have time to reply. He immediately sat cross-legged on the ground and circulated his spiritual energy around his body to quickly expel the poison that had invaded his body. When Brett saw this, he didn't say a word and followed suit. After 5 or 6 minutes, the floor that they were sitting on was covered with a layer of green dust. Brett, do you know which family or organization uses this kind of poison? A strong murderous intent burst out from Kevin's eyes. To be able to find his hiding place and knock out his men using such a terrifying poison while remaining undetected, whoever was behind this was definitely not just some common person. Brett Stewart narrowed his eyes. After thinking for a long time, he slowly raised his head and looked up at the ceiling. The legendary green snake poison is the most lethal poison known to the great powers, and there are probably just a handful of organizations that could potentially produce it, but halfway through his words, Brett Stewart suddenly realized something. Come to think of it, I remember being told that many years ago there was a certain organization in the Great Powers that used to be notorious for making that very poison. I can't remember what it was called, but one night, for some reason, its founding family suddenly left and vanished without a trace from the Great Powers. Rumor has it that they still have a relatively prominent presence in society among ordinary citizens, but without any evidence, no one can know for sure. Kevin tried to make him dig deeper and asked, "Then do you know what the name of that family is?"
If I remember correctly, it was Zucker or something like that.
Brett scratched his head and spoke slowly as he tried to recall.
Does it ring any bells?
Kevin's eyes widened when he heard this. Was this the same Zucker family that resided in St. Louis? He suddenly remembered that Catherine Swinton had been poisoned not long ago, and Frida Zucker had even paid her a visit at the hospital. Has something bad happened in St. Louis? Kevin thought to himself. He quickly took out his phone so he could call Richard Swinton, but he found that there was no signal.
Someone must have installed a signal jammer nearby.
Brett immediately determined the problem.
It seems that there are still people lurking outside, and someone is deliberately trying to trap us inside this place.
Kevin suddenly slammed his right fist on the table, instantly shattering it into pieces. In the Archer's family's mansion, Dominic Archer was lying unconscious on the bed while two doctors in white coats were busy treating his wounds. Gwen Archer hurriedly walked inside the room and asked, "How's my brother?"
"Miss Archer."
5 or 6 big, burly men respectfully greeted her. The previous night, the Archer family had suffered heavy losses after a bloody encounter in the Salix Leaf Hotel. Not only were most of their men either killed or seriously injured, but Dominic Archer had been ruthlessly pushed out of the window by one of Kevin's men, all the way from the private room on the 8th floor. Fortunately, although Dominic Archer's power base wasn't that high, the fall wasn't enough to take his life, and he was able to survive, but just barely. "Don't worry, Miss Archer. We've managed to stabilize your brother's condition, so all his vitals are fine now," one of the doctors reported to her respectfully.
"With Mr. Archer still in a coma, we'll just have to be patient and wait for him to wake up and recover from his injuries,"
the second doctor added. Both of them were doctors from the Archer family's private hospital, so Dominic was in good hands. In the Archer family's mansion, Dominic Archer was lying unconscious on his bed and being treated by 2 doctors. Despite having a low power base as a casual expert, he had enough strength to survive after being pushed out of the Salix Leaf Hotel's 8th floor window by Yale Tanner. However, most of his men were either killed or seriously injured in the brawl. When Gwen Archer hurried into the room to check on him, the doctors reassured her that while he remained in a coma, his condition had already stabilized, so they just had to patiently wait for him to wake up and recover from his injuries. Was my brother really injured because of Kevin? Gwen's eyes flashed with doubt.
"Yes, it's true, Miss Archer. We overheard their conversation while waiting outside the private room. Last night's dinner meeting was a huge failure, and Mr. Archer wound up disagreeing with Kevin. During our battle, more than 100 of our men died at the hands of Mr. Williams' 2 guards."
The man's voice was trembling as he recalled the horrific events. He would never forget what happened that night. "Then why are some of you still alive?" Gwen asked with a sad face. "My brother was seriously injured. Since you were there with him, why didn't you fight them to the death? Aren't you willing to sacrifice your lives for your boss?" Facing Gwen Archer's questioning, the remaining survivors, who were some of Dominic's trusted aides, didn't know what to say. They could only silently lower their heads in embarrassment. "Contact Kevin immediately. I want to meet him," Gwen ordered sharply as her violent aura instantly enveloped the entire room.
"Miss Archer, I advise you to not push through with your plan. The CEO of the Williams Company is very dangerous. It's too risky for you."
One of the trusted aides tried to stop her.
"Please forgive me for sounding disrespectful, Miss Archer. We're only concerned about your safety. Right now, Drake Cook is also pressing us to make a move, so we should prioritize dealing with him first.
With Mr. Archer unconscious, we need you to take charge of the situation," another one added. "Besides, Kevin is obviously the mastermind behind Drake Cook, and if we don't defend ourselves against their attacks soon, it won't be long before the Archer family's empire will collapse." Dominic's trusted aides kept begging her to listen to them. They ignored their plan and blocked the door. They were so afraid that something would happen to Gwen Archer if she left and went after Kevin. If that was the case, they definitely wouldn't be able to escape Dominic Archer's wrath as soon as he woke up and found out about it. In the Central Alternative Healing Academy's branch in Chicago, Paul Vaughn and Jeffrey Bowie were standing in front of the window, looking at the bustling and resplendent view of the city. After their battle in the forest with Kevin, Wayne Ford found it hard to explain his actions to the two of them. So he briefly agreed to take the people from the Central Alternative Healing Academy's headquarters with him before abruptly leaving.
"Last night's events were beyond our control. Now we can only rely on each other to continue pursuing the power pill formula for our schools."
Paul Vaughn violently coughed a few times. He still needed some time to recover from the injuries he'd suffered because of Wayne Ford.
"No one would have thought that Wayne would be so bold. He even made us think that we were allies by coming up with this plan. But in the end, we wasted our time by trusting him. How dare he launch a sneak attack on us? Clearly, he was only using us to obtain the pill formula for himself."
Jeffrey Bowie waved his arms in the air angrily.
"What's done is done. There's no need for us to hold a grudge against Wayne anymore. Besides, even if what you said was true, the Healing Arts School has always been stronger than the other top schools, and our two schools can't resist them right now."
Paul cautioned him.
"Even after our misunderstanding, we have to remain civil. It's best if we don't allow things to further deteriorate. Besides, the people from the Central Alternative Healing Academy's headquarters are staying with him now, so let's just focus our energies on getting our hands on the pill formula."
At that moment, Paul Vaughn was feeling nervous. After the Central Alternative Healing Academy's strength had been greatly weakened by the Alliance's army, they'd fallen to the bottom rank of the top 10 schools. Because of this, the gap between them was starting to get to his head. If he didn't act on the situation soon, he was afraid that his school might be kicked out of the top 10 schools and replaced by another. And if that happened, the Central Alternative Healing Academy would truly become the laughingstock amongst the great powers. Paul Vaughn couldn't bear to imagine how humiliating that would be for him. So the pressure was on for him to find another solution to rebuild the strength of his school and save himself from embarrassment.
"Then what do you think we should do? Wasn't Kevin also seriously injured last night? In that case, it wouldn't be impossible for us to seize him by force," Jeffrey suggested. "Although you're probably right about his current condition, he still has 5 powerful experts with him."
Paul's words hit the nail on the head.
"I never thought that the Radiants would have such a strong foundation. They're all level 5 warriors."
Within the great powers, anyone who was at least a level 5 expert could be considered to be quite powerful compared to everyone else.
"We can't just do nothing, can we?"
Jeffrey protested angrily. He still couldn't get over failing to hear the contents of the Power Pill's formula after being so close to obtaining it. He felt that he'd been outsmarted by Kevin, so it was hard to describe all his unpleasant emotions.
"There's always another way."
Paul suddenly thought of something while trying to reassure Jeffrey.
"Actually, come to think of it, there is something that we can do, but I'm afraid that you might not be up for it." "How come? What did you have in mind?" Jeffrey asked him curiously. "The two of us will have to avoid the eyes and ears of other schools. We must find Kevin and pay him a visit. Then we'll try our best to build a good relationship with him," Paul explained craftily.
Knowing that Kevin wasn't alone and had the support of the entire Radiance behind him, this was the most acceptable approach Paul Vaughn could think of. He figured that what the Central Alternative Healing Academy needed the most wasn't actually the Power Pills formula, but sufficient time for them to recuperate. So if they could become allies with the Radiance, he would no longer have to worry about this school losing its position as one of the top 10 schools.
You mean to say that you want us to submit to Kevin like cowards?
Jeffrey Bowie touched the back of his head in surprise.
We aren't admitting defeat, Jeffrey. We're just making peace with each other. Besides, as long as we can establish a good relationship with Kevin, we don't have to worry about obtaining the pill formula anymore, as we should be able to get a steady supply of medicinal pills from him in the future. That way, raising the strength of both our schools will be as easy as pie.
Paul patiently explained the plan that he'd come up with. After thinking about this for a few minutes, Jeffrey let out a long sigh and nodded seriously.
All right, let's try it your way this time. I'll send someone to find Kevin immediately.
After saying that, Jeffrey Bowie turned around and left. Paul had a proud look in his eyes as he thought about his solution. In the dean's office of the Healing Arts School, Harley Shepard was sitting on the sofa deep in thought. He'd been more worried since the previous night than at any time during the past 10 years combined. Wayne Ford gently waved his hand, gesturing for some members to leave the two of them alone. After that, he found someone to make arrangements for the people of the Central Alternative Healing Academy's headquarters. There was no lack of rooms to stay in at the Healing Arts School, so this wasn't an issue for him. Besides, he figured it was the least that he could do after losing his temper and causing a huge misunderstanding with Paul Vaughn.
While the three of you managed to successfully lure Kevin by making him think that his wife and mother-in-law had been kidnapped, how could you fall for that kid's scheme to drive you apart?
Harley Shepard asked quietly.
You can't blame Kevin. After all, none of the top 10 schools have proven to be trustworthy in his eyes. They all claim to be honest, but the truth is that they only care about their own interests.
Wayne Ford had a thorough understanding of the situation.
Looks like this kid is quite smart,
Harley acknowledged with praise in his eyes.
Do you think this is a good thing?
Wayne looked at him and sighed deeply. He stood up and walked to the window to look at the view of the city in the distance. When he, along with Paul Vaughn and Jeffrey Bowie, willingly engaged in a battle with Kevin just to obtain the Power Pills formula from him, it seemed like they didn't care about their status. But in truth, how many people had actually thought about doing the same thing before but just didn't dare to do it for one reason or another? So Wayne Ford knew that the news of what had happened in the forest would soon spread like wildfire to the other schools. Now that they'd opened up the possibility, this would surely give others the courage to try their luck. At the moment, Kevin was already treading on thin ice, and danger lurked in every corner. And part of the reason why Wayne wanted to obtain the Power Pills formula from Kevin himself was to protect him from these other parties. However, with his plan backfiring on him, it seemed that he had only increased the burden for Kevin. How many more people would attempt to find Kevin now? And how much more ruthless were they going to be just to satisfy their selfish interests?
Should we send some people to secretly keep an eye on him?
Harley suggested.
With that kid's current power base, how many people could keep an eye on him without being detected?
Wayne remarked regretfully.
The golden pill has improved his senses beyond the limits of even someone as powerful as you and me.
Actually, if it wasn't for the Night King endorsing Kevin as our only hope in the fight against the Pinnacle, I wouldn't have had second thoughts about helping you and the others obtain the Power Pill formula.
Harley sighed.
It's a pity.
Wayne wanted to say something but stopped himself. This made Harley frown.
What do you mean?
Harley asked, puzzled by his comment.
The relationship between the top 10 schools is worsening day by day because of Kevin. Previously, we'd already cut ties with Renee Silver while Stephen Walker chose to distance himself from us. And now I've been gravely misunderstood by both Jeffrey Bowie and Paul Vaughn.
Wayne looked up at the sky outside the window. His old face was full of fatigue. The war against Pinnacle hasn't even started yet, but our ship is already taking on water. Is there any hope left for us?
Why don't I go and have a good talk with the kid?
Harley stopped halfway through a sentence. Deep down, even he knew that it was impossible to succeed. At the end of the day, only Kevin could decide whether he would be willing to cooperate with them or not. Back in Corwin Tower, Brett Stewart had remained relatively calm despite their desperate situation. However, Kevin was getting quite anxious. After spending an hour in the study, Kevin was able to refine some poison resistance pills, using the exact recipe that he'd found in his collection of books on herbalism. And after giving them to Elijah Tanner and the others, he started pacing back and forth as he waited for the pill's effect to kick in. But so far, there were still no changes.
Kevin, don't be so anxious. We'll eventually be able to find a way to solve this problem. You just have to be a bit more patient. After all, what you've refined isn't some miracle pill, so it's impossible for them to be cured of the poison immediately after taking it.
Brett comforted him and gave him a couple of pats on the shoulder.
Brett, I can't afford to take my time.
You're the Supreme Commander of the Myriads. I'm sure many of your subordinates know that you've come to my place today, right? If they don't hear from you soon, I'm sure the rest of the Myriads will think that I've done something to harm you. Kevin explained with a solemn expression. Besides, if the two of us are really trapped, how many people who harbor evil intentions against you or me will rush over to attack us as soon as they learn about this? So we should exhaust all our efforts to get out of here as soon as possible.
That makes sense.
Brett nodded in agreement. Kevin had refined some poison resistance pills for the Tanner brothers and Brett's guards, but after some time they were all still unconscious. Kevin became worried that if he and Brett remained trapped inside his apartment for too long, the Myriads would misunderstand and think that there was an internal conflict between the two of them. On top of that, this also left them vulnerable to attack from anyone who was interested in obtaining the Power Pills formula. Kevin's words had very serious implications. While the Supreme Commander and the Deputy Leader of the Myriads had both been attacked, those who didn't know the inside story might wrongly conclude that there was an internal conflict in the Myriads. Based on that assumption, anyone who was quick to judge would suspect Kevin of trying to seize power and rebel against Brett Stewart. Moreover, anyone interested in obtaining the Power Pills formula would see this as an opportunity to take advantage of Kevin's vulnerable position and strike. With all of their men still unconscious, would Kevin and Brett be able to withstand multiple forces attacking them at the same time?
But at the same time, we can't afford to make any reckless decisions.
Brett looked out the window. His face was also full of seriousness.
If they don't wake up soon, there might not be another way.
Kevin kept turning to check on their men. If the poison resistance pill doesn't work, how else can we cure them of the green snake poison? Kevin began to scratch his head as he tried his best to think of an alternative solution. As Kevin continued to pace back and forth, he kept murmuring ideas to himself as Brett Stewart helplessly looked on. Suddenly, he thought of something very important. There were many herbs that he'd previously harvested from the Alliance's headquarters. Forgetting to keep them in his study, he remembered storing them somewhere else in the apartment. The green snake poison was no ordinary poison. As the most lethal kind known to the great powers, it was very potent and debilitating. And since the Tanner brothers and Brett Stewart's guards had been exposed to it for a long period of time, he had to come up with a concoction of herbs with strong medicinal properties in order to counter the poison's venomous effects. Brett, just hang in there for a while. I have to go upstairs to look for something. After saying this, Kevin quickly ran to the second floor of the apartment. This wasn't just a question of their own survival, but also the stability of both the Myriads and the Radiants. Time was of the essence, and they couldn't make any mistakes. Meanwhile, inside the Williams family's mansion in New York, Thomas Williams and several of the family's elders were still kneeling on the floor in the main hall. At the same time, Viola Garcia and Alan Baker were sitting comfortably in armchairs and drinking coffee, without paying any attention to the scene in front of them. Have you made up your mind yet, Thomas? How do you want to die? There was a cruel smile on Viola Garcia's face as if she was talking about something funny.
Envoy, is there really no room for negotiation?
Thomas Williams buried his head deep into the ground with sweat dripping down his forehead.
It seems like the Williams family is still unfamiliar with the rules of the Myriads.
Alan Baker put down his cup of coffee and stood up with his hands behind his back.
Those who have offended their superiors are guilty of committing serious crimes against the organization. Consequently, the Supreme Commander considers death to be the only acceptable form of punishment.
Alan snidely looked at the members of the Williams family who were at their mercy and growled.
But there's really one thing that we need to know right now. Perhaps we can give your family an opportunity to atone for your crime and redeem yourselves in the Supreme Commander's eyes. I wonder if you're willing to accept this offer. Yes, Envoy. We'll do anything to make it up to the Supreme Commander. Please let us know what we can do.
Thomas uttered quickly. After all, who would pass up a chance to live? I heard that the Union stayed in your mansion for a considerable amount of time, so you should have a good relationship with them, right? Viola asked carefully. The Supreme Commander has already declared that he wants to attack the Union. However, he still lacks a spy that could gather information for him in secret. So I wonder if the Williams family is willing to play such a role. Thomas Williams became very anxious when he heard her offer, and the faces of the other Williams family members changed as well. They knew that it wasn't easy to be a spy. Caught in between an imminent battle between these two organizations, it might really just be a matter of time before the entire Williams family would be destroyed by one of them.
Thomas, are you willing to do it or not?
Alan looked down at him from above.
If you agree to our offer, the Williams family will serve as the #1 catalyst to the destruction of the Union. Now, the Supreme Commander is a man who clearly knows the difference between kindness and hatred. So if we succeed thanks to your contributions, your family shall be rewarded handsomely when the time comes.
Without waiting for Thomas Williams' reply, Viola immediately added, On the other hand, if you refuse to help the Myriads, the two of us will have no choice but to annihilate your entire family right now. Both of them had made themselves very clear. The offer was pretty much one-sided, given Alan Baker's enticement and Viola Garcia's threat. As the Williams family's patriarch, did Thomas Williams really have much of a choice?
I'm willing to become your spy.
Thomas braced himself and gritted his teeth as he reluctantly agreed. As Laura Williams knelt on the floor silently, she painfully closed her eyes when she heard her husband's decision. In the Radiance's branch in St. Louis, Dylan Hill was listening to his subordinates, who were updating him on the current situation.
Sir, the Huxley family is in a precarious position right now. Given that the Radiance has very few enemies left in St. Louis, why don't we take advantage of the support of the Thompson and Swinton families and finish off the Huxley family in one fell swoop?
One of his assistants reported respectfully. A thought occurred to Dylan as he wondered when Kevin would return.
This matter is of great importance. I think it's better to report this to the Chancellor to let him make the decision.
Just then, another subordinate ran over quickly and announced, Sir, I just received news that the Huxley family has hired a lot of powerful experts to go to Chicago. It's very likely that they have plans to harm Mr. Williams.
What? How long has it been since they left? Why did you only come to report this now?
Dylan quickly stood up from the sofa. I'm sorry, sir, I only heard about this matter just now. And according to my calculations, the Huxley family's hired experts should already have arrived in Chicago by now. The messenger lowered his head in shame. Dylan Hill took a deep breath and waved his hand to signal the two aides to leave him alone. After that, he immediately took out his phone and called Spencer's number. After learning about this matter, the members who were at the Radiance's headquarters started to mobilize. A large number of their experts secretly infiltrated Detroit and Chicago, while Spencer personally brought some people with him to St. Louis. Back in Corwin Tower, the rest of the day passed by quickly. The next morning, with the sun shining brightly through the windows, the door of the study finally reopened. When Kevin emerged, his clothes were torn and tattered, his hair was messy, and his face was covered in ash. Despite this, he happily ran downstairs. Elijah Tanner and the others had only woken up 2 hours before. Since then, they'd been staying on the first floor using their own spiritual energy to protect the doors and windows, to make sure that the green snake poison wouldn't drift inside the apartment. However, while the poison resistance pills had helped them regain their consciousness and some of their strength, they were still feeling some residual effects from inhaling so much of the venomous poison. I finally got it. Kevin ran down the stairs so quickly that he almost tripped and fell on the floor. Seeing his disheveled appearance, Elijah Tanner and his brothers reflexively took a step back. At the same time, the two guards from the Myriads hurriedly moved to protect Brett Stewart.
Kevin, is that you? What the hell happened to you up there? Why are you such a mess?
Even Brett Stewart couldn't help but be surprised at his appearance.
Mr. Williams, are you all right?
Elijah Tanner asked with a strange expression as he furrowed his brows. Actually, none of them could be blamed for having such a bewildered reaction. After all, Kevin was almost unrecognizable, looking no different from someone who had just escaped after being trapped for weeks inside a coal mine. Of course, I'm fine. Kevin smiled as he placed a few pills on the table. Let's take one poison immunity pill each. After taking them, we can finally leave this apartment and go outside. Go outside? Mr. Williams, what do you mean? Yale Tanner's eyes widened.
I hope you were just joking, Mr. Williams. Although we're practically trapped here right now, we're not crazy enough to senselessly kill ourselves out there.
Sage Tanner waved his arms in the air.
Mr. Williams, why don't you give your plan some more thought? Don't do anything reckless.
Tyson Tanner cautioned him.
Mr. Williams, did you work all night on these pills just to try and get poisoned again?
Felix Tanner scratched his head. Elijah Tanner and the others had their doubts as they discussed whether or not to try the pills. As for the two guards from the Myriads, they were simply staring at Kevin as if they were looking at a fool. Why don't any of you believe that these poison immunity pills will work? It took me a lot of effort to concoct these medicinal pills, and I made several attempts before I was able to finally produce a successful batch. These will not only cure us of any residual effects from yesterday's exposure, but they'll also give us complete immunity against the green snake poison altogether. Kevin tried to convince them that he knew what he was doing. In order to concoct these medicinal pills, Kevin had tried and failed several times. Knowing that their survival was at stake, he didn't give up no matter how difficult it was to come up with the perfect concoction. Fortunately, he discovered it in time. Otherwise, now that Corwin Tower had been compromised, it wouldn't have been easy for them to stay alive inside his apartment for much longer.
It's not that I don't believe you, but how are you sure that your pills won't kill us? Didn't you come up with your own recipe for them?
Brent looked at the table with a strange expression and pointed at the shiny black pills that Kevin had made for them. Don't worry, I'm sure we won't die from taking them. But if any of you do actually die, then you can come and complain to me about it later, Kevin promised them sarcastically. Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but be puzzled. They silently thought to themselves, how can we find you if we're already dead? Don't tell me that we'll haunt you in your sleep like ghosts. In the end, although Brett Stewart and the others were unwilling, none of them wanted to offend Kevin, so they all begrudgingly took the poison immunity pills at the same time and hoped for the best. Then Kevin opened the door and led the way as everyone left his apartment. 2 hours later, Kevin and the others finally managed to exit the main entrance of the building. When they got to the sidewalk, they discovered that the entire Corwin Tower was covered in green smoke.
It seems that poisonous fog isn't about to disperse anytime soon. On the contrary, it's getting thicker and thicker.
A light flashed in Brett Stewart's eyes as if he had realized something.
The building is covered by some kind of semi-invisible barrier. It's trapping all the fog inside of it,
Elijah Tanner noted as he touched the transparent wall. Even the most technological advanced barriers have a weakness that we can exploit, Yale Tanner said as he tried to think of a solution. Find it, Kevin ordered them, and everyone immediately started looking. Meanwhile, at the Salix Leaf Complex, Dorothy had just woken up when she heard the doorbell ringing. Who is it? What are you doing at my home so early in the morning? When she went downstairs and opened the door, she was stunned when she saw Paul Vaughn and Jeffrey Bowie standing side by side in the doorway. Both of them were holding a huge number of gifts in their hands.
Long time no see, Mrs. Jones. We're sorry for offending you the last time we saw each other. In order to make up for it, the two of us brought something special for you today as an apology."
Paul Vaughn greeted her with a smile. "What are the two of you doing here?" Dorothy had yet to recover from her shock.
"He told you that we're here to apologize. Why don't you understand what he said? Is there something wrong with your hearing?"
Jeffrey Bowie's expression changed slightly as he scolded her. Just as he finished speaking, Paul Vaughn casually nudged him with his elbow.
"Mrs. Jones, please don't take offense at my brother. He's just too cranky and frank sometimes, so his words can be a little unpleasant to hear. Please don't take anything he said to heart."
Paul was much more polite than Jeffrey as he tried to quickly smooth things out between them. "You mean you're really here to apologize to me?" Dorothy was stunned for a moment, then she immediately came back to her senses. Her face was suddenly full of smiles as she looked at all the gifts that they were carrying.
"Of course."
Paul gently raised his hands.
"We even brought you some gifts as a peace offering. I hope you can accept them, Mrs. Jones."